Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone, and happy Thursday to you wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to the M&E Thursday Talks, your favorite webinar on evaluation in the peace building field. Just in case you've forgotten, my name is Jack Farrell, and I am the DME for Peace project manager at Search for Common Ground, based in a very lovely and sunny London. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague, Dallin van Leuven of Search, who's going to lead a discussion on countering violent extremism, an introductory guide to concepts, programming, and best practices. Just a note, if you have a question during the webinar, you can write it on the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and we will address it once you reach the Q&A. I'm now going to hand over to today's guest, Dallin. Welcome to the hot seat. You're very welcome to the Thursday Talks, and the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today and to really present something that I think is really unique, that hasn't been done surprisingly yet. And I'm very excited to represent Search and this training curriculum. As you can see from the screen, this is our curriculum. The Countering Violent Extremism Introductory Guide and Training Curriculum were developed by Search for Common Ground in collaboration with Hedaya, and it was made possible through funding by the European Union's Strive programming. Oh, sorry, I muted myself there. Now, Search for Common Ground, as you know, is a peace building organization, and that philosophy has really been embedded in everything that we put into this curriculum. We say that our mission is very boldly to end violent conflict, and we do that by understanding the differences between people and acting on the commonalities between us. And that ethos of Search for Common Ground is really the basis for how we approach the issue of violent extremism. You know, as we look at the kinds of conflicts that Search for Common Ground and other peace building organizations deal with, these are very much and very often conflicts that are driven or affected by the issue of violent extremism. So for us, this curriculum really hits a great need across the world, and so we're happy to contribute to that. What went into the development of this is really just an understanding of where the field of countering violent extremism is. It's a relatively new field. It's much younger than, say, peace building or development or rule of law programming, for example. But it's a field that, because it's so new, it grows very rapidly. There's a great deal of research that's been going on, especially with threats like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But even though there's a lot of research and a lot of programming that's been done in response to those conflicts, the issue of violent extremism itself is still very mystified. It's described often as a phenomenon, which for us is very problematic. And that's because it kind of makes it a problem that can't be addressed. It's a phenomenon as in we don't understand it. And even when there are understandings, sometimes these are based on assumptions, either because they're based on an assumption or actual real research findings that are valid for one particular context, one particular group, but they don't translate well to another violent extremism group, or they don't translate into another context. And so this depth of assumptions actually can really hinder us as a field. Now, of course, peace building and countering violent extremism, sometimes we also call it preventing violent extremism. I would really consider these to be sister fields. And this is because the way we respond to these conflicts has to be based in the conflict itself, in the issue that is at the heart of the matter. But even if they are sister fields of practice, if you will, the good practices and lessons learned that have been developed in the development field, in the peace building field, they often have not translated into this new field of practice of countering violent extremism. And even when, again, as we're learning so much about this field, a lot of those best practices haven't been translated into real action. The results or the findings from research aren't being translated into actual programming. And even when they are, they're often not accessible in local languages where, of course, violent extremism is experienced all throughout the world, but often not in the lessons learned aren't translated into local languages. For example, Arabic, Russian, even French, which is a global language as well. And again, collaboration, much like the peace building field, which I think is steeped in the idea of collaboration, because again, coming from Search for Common Ground, it's part of our ethos. It's about bringing people together and working on those commonalities. But even when we confront a similar challenge together, that collaboration can still be limited, where the different organizations that are working on issues relevant to violent extremism aren't being addressed in a joint process. And very relevant to today, the responses that are being done are often driven by very, what we would call hard or securitized responses. These could be mass arrests, they could be emergency law, they could be a variety of police or military interventions, that these can sometimes have more exacerbating effects on the problem of violent extremism. In addition, the responses, because the field has grown and has learned from practice and research, we've sort of begun to think that we know what to do now. And unfortunately, that means that some of our responses can be very simplistic and can kind of be embedded. Now that the field of practice of CVE has kind of moved forward, now we kind of see these sort of wheelhouses of programming, but not as much innovation as we would like to see. And again, relevant to today, the idea of how much funding is being made available for this field, it's beginning to be reduced. Now, this training curriculum was contextually adapted for two specific regions. We were interested in these regions because they had a lot of commonalities with one with another, but also there was a great need in these regions. And that was Central Asia, including Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And then, of course, the MENA region. And when we look at these regions, we see that there's a lot of, I see my slides haven't moved on there. There we go. So when we look at these regions, we see the real issue of CVE, the threats to the field, as well as the threats of violent extremism in these areas. And to contextualize the training curriculum for that, we had to really understand what was the influence of regional actors, and we can come more on that in the Q&A section. We can come back to that for sure, but let's focus on this idea that even in these regions, there's very broad definitions of what constitutes violent extremism. For example, in Central Asia, a lot of the legislation, a lot of the international conventions, if you will, talk about countering extremism, not even focusing on necessarily just the violent part of it. And when we look in these two regions, we also see a large influx of laws and tactics that can actually make CVE or even counterterrorism operations, make them used to crack down on political dissidents and religious minorities. In fact, one of our colleagues, one of our participants with this project, helped to actually write the legislation for his country on countering extremism, as they interpreted it in his country. And he related to us how he was very frustrated to see that this law that he had helped put together was being used to crack down on people who really had nothing to do with violent extremism as well. And so as we approached this training curriculum, we really wanted to make sure that we were speaking to what was happening on the ground. And so for those reasons, the curriculum itself had the following goals: really to not just provide trainings for government and civil society actors on this field, or to make them available in Arabic and Russian, as well as English, but really to push forward non-coercive strategies to counter violent extremism. And that's really by promoting a do no harm approach. And again, since collaboration has been limited, we wanted to really promote that and to promote a whole of society approach. And when we talk about that, we don't just mean that people are sort of brought in at a very topical level, that they're brought in to have real and substantial participation in this field, to really confront these challenges that are quite important and quite strong in some of these regions. And again, we wanted to challenge this so-called mystification of countering violent extremism as a field, but also violent extremism as itself. So let's get into what the curriculum itself is. Again, it's available in English, Russian, and Arabic, and it's broken down into 10 learning modules. We can get to each of those in a second, but the training package that comes with it, it's not just an introductory guide that somebody can take and read themselves to have access to all of the resources, because we've really compiled libraries, if you will, of some of the latest lessons learned, best practices, and great research for these regions. But the training package that can be used by anyone really has a facilitator's guide to guide through the activities that would be done in a training setting. It also includes webinars that you can find on YouTube in the 3 languages that kind of briefly explain each of the modules and give the best practices and key takeaways for each of those modules. Trainers are also, they also have access to the presentations and as well as to handouts to use in activities throughout the training. One of the things that we also included was over 25 videos of programming around the world. This is what you see on your screen is what participants would see in their particular training. This is just one example of a video. This video is from Search for Common Ground and our programming in Morocco. But participants would be able to have access to all of these videos from around the world, to have a sort of a platform for discussion, to have conversation starters, to be inspiration. And we've found that these are really effective in trainings. People are able to relate to the stories and the examples that they see on the screen, and they're really able to prompt really meaningful discussions on what this means in participants' own context. We've made these available, even no matter which language they're in, by subtitles in English, Russian, and Arabic. Now let's look at the modules themselves. These, as you can see on your screen, are the 10 modules. To sort through them, though, I would say that these would be the core modules, the core foundation of a training on what countering violent extremism is. To have a grounding on what it means, what the field is, to understand how to go about contextualizing our understanding of what drives violent extremism and radicalization. The 5th module is one on gender, which helps to really add to that. And finally, with the 10th module is an introduction to monitoring and evaluation. However, the real core of the training curriculum are the 5 modules you'll see here. And this is what we mean by the whole of society approach. Each of these modules helps participants to sort of engage with each sector of a society to understand how can we bring in community leaders, government officials, civil society, but also women and girls and young people. What are the roles of the education sector, of teachers, of those frontline actors that have these great relationships with youth in the communities that we need to work in. So I would really say that the core of the curriculum, the bulk of it, is really promoting this whole of society approach. Finally, we do provide specific modules on to engage with in countering violent extremism. That's education, and of course, education implies not just those in formal settings in schools, but also in informal settings as well. We also talk about the role of narratives, which is oftentimes one of those sort of those wheelhouses that always gets discussed. So we really wanted to engage with this and get participants to really think what it means to engage in narratives. And we can come back to this more in the Q&A. And finally, we wanted to prompt the discussion on using technology as well. So these are the 10 modules. And the great thing about this curriculum is it's very flexible. You could choose those specific modules that you wanted to implement in your specific training. So to date, the CVE curriculum has been used to train over 500 people around the world in 5 countries as of now. And we've been able to see some really great successes come out of these trainings. In trainings that, especially those that have a mixed audience, when you bring in government and civil society actors into the same training, you really start to see a lot of alignment on what the threat is in a specific context and what are the responses that would be best to use, or what are the avenues for collaboration that can really have an effect or an impact on these issues. We've also seen some really great respect that has been built for each other in different sectors. In one of our trainings, we had a civil society actor sort of just comment on his own surprise that he didn't know that those that were working in the government, that were working for the police and the Ministry of Interior, were so well equipped to deal with this, because he himself had come with his own assumptions on what the government's response to this issue would be. And so that new respect has really helped to build relationships. And in some of our trainings, we've had a lot of participants who've come from all over their respective countries, exchanging numbers and building collaboration and staying in touch after this, because the training itself is a very active training, which is something I'm really proud that we can offer. It's not a traditional top-down training. You don't go and sit and listen to the facilitator teach you what it is that you need to know. But the way that we've really gone about putting this together is through a facilitated learning approach, where the facilitator helps to guide participants to address specific challenges, to have discussions about issues that are meant to provoke reflection, that are meant to provoke introspection, that are also meant to help build these relationships, because people are able to really share their own expertise, but also learn from each other. And so it becomes a setting where students or trainees themselves can be very much a part of the learning process. We've also seen some great success in encouraging non-coercive strategies that have really helped to shift people's perceptions on how to address these issues. We've also seen trainees become very interested in reaching out to women and youth, and we've seen concrete steps that they've done to make sure that women and youth are involved in their peace building and countering violent extremism activities. But really, I think this is perhaps one of the greatest tools of this training curriculum, is that as an introductory guide, it is not going to be a college course. But what it really can do is it drives interest in the field of countering violent extremism. It helps people to feel comfortable with what it means. And by doing so, it increases the pool that organizations like Search for Common Ground or Hadaya, our partner, have in being able to reach out to new organizations and new actors to really participate in this field. That's all I'd like to share with you right now. You can see the links here on your screen on where you can go to find the curriculum itself. It's free for download. It's openly available. You can also engage with Search for Common Ground at the website here and just if you wanted to look at our youth-specific programming. But I wanted to open it up to questions if there were any, and we can go into more in depth on some of those issues. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Dallin. You've given us a lot to think about, and I know there's plenty of questions from the audience already. For those of you who are new to the Thursday Talks, a couple of notes about our format. You can submit a question in two ways. The first is through the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, which will allow you to type your question. The second is to click on the hand icon to raise your hand, which will allow us to unmute your microphone so you can ask your question live. When you do submit your question, we ask that you submit your name and affiliation. And just a note, these talks are recorded and posted on DME for Peace's media gallery. So those who are not able to join us at this time can go back and listen to the presentation and the discussion. So I'm going to kick things off, Dallin, and use my moderator's privilege here. You referenced the use of non-coercive strategies quite a lot. I guess I'd like to sort of dig a little deeper on what these non-coercive strategies were and how exactly those help from a do no harm conflict sensitivity perspective.
Okay. I think it's a great question because it's a central concern of ours. The field of countering violent extremism and counterterrorism itself are almost, they have bad reputations, and sometimes it's deservedly so. The way that some actors have gone about to promote more peaceful societies, to prevent and counter violent extremism have been in ways that did not have a do no harm approach, and that actually discouraged people from participating in these kinds of programmings. And this can be done in a lot of ways. This can be through referral mechanisms. This is a common idea, is that we spot those that we are afraid of being radicalized or at the cusp of radicalization, and we report them to the police or somebody else who can take care of the issue for us. And what that drives, unfortunately, is marginalization. It drives a lot of stereotyping and assumptions based on what a violent extremist looks like or acts like, or even what they believe. And that can have a very marginalizing effect that can actually drive radicalization even further. In some countries, for example, in Central Asia and in the MENA region, we've seen policies that again are coercive. Let's widen the lens a little bit. Earlier, as I was saying, that we have to understand regional actors. You know, in the news, there's a lot of coverage that's been going on about what China's response to what they see as a potential radicalization in the western part of the country, and what their response has been. And these can be removing Arabic script from mosques or from restaurants. For example, if a restaurant offers halal food, we see, you know, Arabic script being removed from buildings or even from mosques. We see mosques having to be remodeled. And this is a response to try and bring everybody together by not standing out so much, rather than embracing our diversity. And I think very much for Central Asia and also for the MENA region, we do have regional actors that have been pressuring a more hard response. That would be mass arrests, that would be long-term detention, that would be re-education camps, or even exile into a different country or to a different area. And these tactics don't address the problem. They don't address the underlying issue, and they increase tensions and really further marginalization. And I think they really don't help. You know, we look at the leaders of many of the largest violent extremist groups in the world have been held in prisons throughout the Middle East. And so we have to be conscious of that. And whether coercive responses, although they have their place, they don't resolve the conflict. You know, as a Search for Common Ground as a peace building organization, you know, we are not soldiers, but we mean to end conflict in that sense. We don't promote violent responses to it. We seek to resolve the underlying problem. And I think that if we engage violent extremism with the same toolkit and with the same sort of empathy as those that are looking to engage and transform a conflict, that we can have an effect that would really be helpful in the long run.
Thanks, Dallin. I want to sort of build off a couple of things as well as provide some grounding to this conversation. There's been a lot of questions from the audience about how Search and Hidayah have defined violent extremism, and what are some of the assumptions that prevent an accurate understanding of what violent extremism actually is. And then I want to build on that again by the concept of best practices and standards. How did you discern what best practice is when sort of developing this curriculum? Did you use any frameworks? What were your tools?
Oh, well, these are very good questions, everyone. You know, every single discussion that you have on violent extremism or countering violent extremism begins with, what in the world do we mean by this? And it was a big exercise for us to go through and really find a definition of violent extremism that we were comfortable with, and that we felt would be adaptable to the context that we were working in. I'm going to pull up our definition right here and read it to you. But the way we define violent extremism, and this was actually, in the long run, we adopted a definition from our partner Hidayah. And in their definition, it was that violent extremism refers to the beliefs and actions of people who support or use ideologically motivated violence to further social, economic, religiously based, or political objectives. You know, when people go about trying to define this is a big issue. I've already shared for you an example of trying to define this in a legal sense. It's one of our big concerns about how the law sets out to define violent extremism. These can be overly broad. These can be, the laws could address, you know, just simple beliefs. And that in a legal sense, that's a lot more tenuous, if you will. For those of us that are working to transform conflict, it's a lot more approachable to understand that the motivations behind it and to focus on those, because again, this is not a coercive approach. But I think too often discussions on violent extremism focus on religion. They focus on a lot of issues that seem to be, again, these are assumptions that they seem to be the drivers of violent extremism. that they seem to be based on a specific religious ideology or a political ideology. But if you are able to dig into it a lot more, you can find that, you know, the religious part, for example, is actually just a way to try and present meaning to what is actually a political conflict or political grievance. And so if we were, when we were trying to approach a definition for this, we wanted to make sure that we had one that encompasses everything, that didn't just simply focus on the use of violence, because we wanted it to be, we wanted to make sure that we address or are able to reach out to those that are also supportive of the use of violence. Because again, as a peace building organization, we have to build a culture of peace, which means confronting a culture of violence as well. When societies don't tolerate violence as a means to an end, then we can see a real transformation happen in these communities. And so that really drove our definition there itself.
So then just building on that, just like how did you guys discern what a best practice was?
Yeah, so it was a lot of desk research. There's certainly a lot that's being done. There's every week we're coming across new publications, new guidance documents. There's been a lot of high-level meetings or discussions that have produced policy papers on the best practices in the field. We link to all of these in the further learning opportunities sections of every module so that they're accessible to the users of this curriculum. But it was a lot of research, and it's also built on Search for Common Ground's own experiences, as well as the experiences of our partner, Hadaya, who have engaged in this issue in countries all around the world, working with local actors. We had discussions at Search for Common Ground on what we have been learning from this field. We had peer reviewers from other organizations who are experts in this field as well, who provided their own input as this process went along. So it was a very collaborative one. It was one that was based off of the most recent information that we have, and it's those things that are aligned with the ethos of Hadaya and Search for Common Ground as organizations that are looking to promote these best practices.
Great, thanks a million, Dallin. Our next question comes from my good friend and colleague, Maria Selby. Maria writes, I was curious if you could share some examples of the concrete ways that this training has enabled partnerships with women and girls.
Okay. One of our partners who implemented this training curriculum, they worked with local peace building organizations, and they trained a number of peace building organizations that were unfortunately all male. It was through the curriculum itself. They had a very engaging training session on gender and on including women and girls, and they made a real commitment then and there to start bringing in women and girls. And so they put a lot of efforts into even bringing in partners to finish the training with them. They wanted to make sure that it happened immediately, to get them involved even before the training finished. And that cascaded down into their work from then on. They continued to set goals into what they were doing. But it wasn't, again, it's not just about engaging women and girls in a very topical sense. We don't want just them to be in the room. We want them to be partners and leaders like every other sector of society. And so the gender module really engages people to wrestle with what are the actual barriers that women and girls face to being actively involved in this, and to addressing those barriers themselves. And so for these particular partners in the example I just gave, that was quite transformative for them and had real effects even before the training was able to finish.
Great, thank you, Dallin. A number of people have asked, including Sarah Ahmed, does Search conduct these trainings for civil society organizations working on CVE?
We have, and we will continue to do so. Search itself has trained hundreds of actors on this, including lots of religious leaders, religious actors, reporters, columnists, if you will, civil society actors and government actors as well. I don't know of any training that's in the works right now, but these are always an ongoing process, and they continue to happen. I think something that would be really interesting to see is something that would be more open for a lot of people who are interested to really seek out. But a lot of the times, just by the way Search for Common Ground works, that we do this based on the projects, on the real need that we have for a specific project in a specific area. Our partner Hedaya is already implementing trainings elsewhere as well. They work a lot with their own partners, and again are expanding the capacities of those that they work with as well. It's something I would really certainly like to see in the future as well.
Yeah, and just to reaffirm, and you can confirm this as well, Dallin, anybody can access the training and the facilitation guide and the modules on the Search for Common Ground website, correct?
Exactly, yes.
Perfect. And I will make sure.
Part of that would be to have trainings of trainers as well, because it's really a dynamic approach.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that before the end of this webinar, I will include the link in the chat box to all of today's participants, so that everybody can access it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to connect with Dallin on it. We have time for a couple more questions. The next one comes from Matt Mitchells. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Matt, from Creative Learning. Matt asked about the 10th module, which is on monitoring evaluation. And he asks, speak more to M&E and how you demonstrate the counterfactual, that violent extremism didn't happen, and how you find that causality because of the intervention.
It's a great question, Matt. And it's one of the things that not only the field of countering violent extremism, but also the field of peace building struggle with. It's hard to prove a counterfactual. It's hard to prove that something didn't happen, and that if it didn't happen, that it didn't happen because of something that we did. In peace building and in CVE, we see a lot of anecdotal evidence. We can talk about specific participants who had a change of heart. For us, it's very hard to go about monitoring and evaluating something that didn't happen. But that's also at the level of impact, right? There's multiple levels that we would evaluate and assess change or impact from our programming. One of the things that is most effective in CVE, not just because it's truly effective itself, but also because it's something that we can monitor a lot more easily, is the idea of mentorships. Mentorships, when you're working with those that are vulnerable, that are marginalized, and that really are at risk of radicalization and joining violent extremist groups. Mentorships have a very great impact on people. And because you're working with an individual, there's a lot of metrics or ways that you can go about seeing and observing change and sort of addressing that term of causality, which is something that's a lot harder when you're at the impact level. So from my perspective, it's a lot more easy. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more logical to monitor and evaluate where you work at that more personal level, because it's a lot more accurate. If we were to expand it to the impact level that like the example that you suggest, it becomes a lot more difficult, and it's something I think we're still all struggling with, but we're still making strides with it. And there's a lot of resources with the training curriculum on really how to go about monitoring and evaluating your programming.
And just while we're on the training curriculum itself, I know our audience today is very diverse, coming from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of different contexts, and a variety of different interests. And there's always in the role of media and technology when it comes to violent extremism. I think we all know about this idea of amplification of extremist voices on platforms like Twitter, 4chan, 8chan. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on, or hear what some of the insights are regarding media and technology that this curriculum offers.
Well, there's certainly things that we take to heart. I think one of the great things that's included in this training curriculum is really to understand, and I think, for example, the module on narratives, when you put this in a training, it's a very impactful exercise to do with your participants, but to really understand what is a narrative and what is a narrative that has an impact, that has the potential to change someone's, really their worldview. And I think this is both the challenge, but the opportunity with this idea of narratives. You know, when we think about content on social media, we think of numbers of tweets or different websites or social media posts, and that these are somehow influencing people. But they really share a worldview that is convincing, one that provides a way to frame the world, the way that people see it, the way that people engage with it, and what they should do going forward to resolve the conflicts or the issues that they have. And I think what we have struggled with is, as a field, is that by this assumption, if you will, that if we just simply eliminate all the content from violent extremists, and if we are able to replace it or to sort of share more content than them, that we will somehow have an effect on changing a narrative. And I don't think that that's, and the best practices are that really doesn't work. But what we're able to do with the curriculum is get people to really understand that if you want to have an effect with changing someone's worldview, that has to be not just some kind of media output, but this is very much linked to our human interactions. It's linked to our meaning in the world and what we can do to make sense of the world and to right the wrongs that we see. Search for Common Ground in all of its work really engages people to engage positively to respond to the conflicts or the issues that they face. And I think narratives, as the field sees it, can be very limiting in that, because they don't necessarily embrace an understanding that this can't just be a media output. This has to be something that really hits people where they are and connects them with those that can help them.
And Dallin,
obviously
you've just finished producing this curriculum and you're rolling it out and implementing it in a number of different contexts. But as we wrap up today, I'd love to know what you see as the next step in this curriculum. Would you like to expand it to different contexts? Are you on adapting it after you've carried out a number of these different trainings? What's the plan for the future development of this curriculum?
Well, so the piloting process of the curriculum gave us a lot of lessons learned. It helped us to reframe a lot. But that being said, you know, as the field continues to grow, we're certainly interested in adapting it and updating it as new best practices or lessons learned are realized in this field. We would like to definitely continue to expand it to other regions and in other languages. We're keen on, in fact, this training has already been adapted for, or at least used by Search for Common Ground teams in context outside of the two regions that that we originally designed it for, and that's because it's still a very flexible training curriculum. We would love to continue to see it be contextualized for other regions, to be translated in new languages. We'd love to see this to become a much more widely spread, widely accessible tool, because even if the field has been ongoing for many, many years, for some reason, there's no publicly available curriculum like this to help anybody, whether they're with Search for Common Ground or Hadaya or elsewhere, to have a training curriculum that they could use to engage with people in their community. And I think it really fills a niche that has been, open for way too long.
Yeah, and I will use this as an opportunity to encourage all the participants today to continue to share your resources, your tools, your reports, your evaluations, your guides, your trainings, so that we can work together to build sort of more effective programming, so we can learn from each other's mistakes, learn from each other's failures,
exactly,
learn from each other's successes and build on that. We work in a resource finite field. We can't do it all, but if we do it together, we can do it a lot better. So I'm going to use this opportunity just to thank Dallin. Dallin, you've been a great host, handled the questions superbly. And I want to thank the audience for joining this edition of the M&E Thursday Talks. I really enjoy this part of my job. It's great to chat with all of you and chat about topics which are really interesting and share this knowledge with our field. The recording will be posted online on the M&E Thursday Talk discussion page later today, so please return to it, share it with your colleagues, and continue the learning. For those of you looking to access the materials and the curriculum that Dallin was talking about today, if you look at your chat function on your GoToWebinar dashboard, you will have a link that I have just sent through to you guys. Thank you all for joining. Thank you again, Dallin. We'll be back with another Thursday Talk in a couple of weeks, and I can't wait to see you guys all online.
Thank you so much.